Hello.
Hello.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Luciana Gama Muniz. I am Project Director at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. It is a great honor to have all of you here with us, Alice Hill, Carlos Eduardo Young, and Izabella Teixeira. Today, we will have a dialogue about climate adaptation agenda. And before we start the debate, I would like to pass the floor to Izabella, who will introduce us to the theme and the speakers. Izabella, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Luciana. Welcome, my friends. Good evening for the Brazilians. Good afternoon for Alice. Thank you very much for joining us. I know that you have your summertime, but it's amazing to have the opportunity to dialogue with you. I'd like only to highlight here that this is an informal dialogue. I will ask you just exactly to have informal chat because this is really interesting and strategic issue. The nexus of COVID and climate change has so far brought attention to short-term greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We used to discuss about mitigation recently, public health response, new virus vulnerabilities, like in Brazil have this debate today, consider deforestation and the potentiality of new virus like arbovirus that can come and have new pandemics, not only here in Brazil, but around the world. And also we're exactly discussing this relationship between humankind and nature and how we cannot manage this, we cannot control this. Also, you have to learn about how to adapt our lifestyles, considering the change that climate crisis can bring to the humankind. And so COVID-19 crisis showed to us that we need to change. And we have really been discussing the last months how we can have an economic recovery based on, for example, climate change mitigation, and then how indeed we can be more ambitious, how indeed we can have some shortcuts to address better climate change, to tackle climate change. But on another side of the coin, here we like to address the opportunity to use economic recovery to address adaptation. Indeed, how in a country like Brazil, we can use funds, economic funds, private and public ones, to a better allocation, consider adaptation, because we need to be prepared for the climate change crisis, and we need to prepare for new health crisis that probably will come also after COVID. So climate change causes problems that are social and economic unevenly distribute, as Carlos Young, the Professor Carlos Eduardo, likes to highlight. In Brazil, we have deep inequalities, and climate change will turn to worse than even further. In urban and rural areas, you have probably both sides of the coin. It's very important to learn with this process, to understand better how scientists, how policymakers, how indeed people are fully dedicated to understand the impacts and how indeed you can manage and how you can adapt for new conditions in the planet. And also the scenarios are not so good as well, as we will see soon. Learning from policy challenges during the COVID-19 crisis could enhance efforts not only to reduce, as I mentioned before, carbon emissions, but also to adaptation agenda in such a way to prepare humankind for future crises. This is something that sometimes is easy to talk about, but not necessarily easy to convince people, policymakers, and also to bring the science closer to show to us how we can have to take decision today to minimize or to be resilient, considering the vulnerabilities and risk that humankind will be exposed based on climate change. Learning, so my feeling is that as we can check today in Financial Times, in this crisis you have sometimes some measures that go against the effort to tackle climate change. We can read today in Financial Times, for example, that the raising of deforestation, not only in Latin America, but also in Asian, in African countries. what it means that probably we'll go into this equilibrium that we have between in the ecosystems, and probably we are getting closer and closer to a disruptive process that can bring additional crisis or new crisis for the process. So I'd like to remember only here to facilitate the dialogue that next year you have the COP 26, sorry, that will conclude all the rules of Paris Agreement implementation. And Paris Agreement implementation is not only agreement based on mitigation, it's also based on adaptation. And we need to understand how the countries will propose their strategy to manage better at the national levels adaptation. And this is something that, in my point of view, we need to understand how a country like Brazil and how a country like the United States, we're looking forward to bring the national strategy based on mitigation and also based on adaptation. We need to have a new climate governance system in view. We need to discuss this also at national security policies, must strategically address climate change, resilience, and risks. And sometimes I know that the United States, we have studies and reports based on this. And in Brazil, I think that we have a lack of knowledge of strategic interest or engagement, considering how we can bring these issues together. I'm convinced that I hope that Alice can bring us some news or give us some inputs about these issues, but also we cannot forget that to approach adaptation investment as a driver for economic recovery. Kadu also likes to highlight this, and we used to discuss now new Green Deals, new green economic recovery. We use also to discuss the new values and new interests, new lifestyles, how indeed we have considered the business as usual in the past, how indeed we move on, the pacts of the new economies like economy of innovation, have different issues that you can use to combine it to bring into adaptation agenda and to understand better how we can move on, consider the new lifestyles, new job generation, multi-stakeholders engagements, private and public sector co-responsibilities. So everything is coming, and also an innovative and a provocative debate like the new Human Development Index that probably will come together, bring together also environmental issues. What I'm trying to say here is that you have the illusions of the present. You don't need to wait for the future. What's happening today means that we need to manage better what we have today. If you want to have a more sustainable, a more inclusive future. The COVID-19 crisis shows us how humankind is not prepared to face the nature crisis, but also provides an opportunity to develop a better path forward. The global fallout from COVID-19 demonstrates the need to invest in resilience measures before a catastrophe strikes, whether it's another virus or a superstorm. This is something that Alice Hills wrote, okay, exactly in the paper that you can check the website, that what the coronavirus pandemic teaches to us about fighting climate change. I hope that you can share her point of views and how indeed, what is the process that we must pay attention, indeed, what are the key issues that we need to address, and how we can, as society, discuss this in an innovative way, not based on threats, but based on hope. We are able to manage this. I hope that we are able to manage this agenda and not only be concentrated on crisis, on threats or something that we cannot solve. We can solve this if we're able to anticipate, we can manage this, if we can able to have a robust agenda and have international cooperation as part of our national strategy, consider co-benefits that you can generate together. Finally, we are here informally this dialogue with two specialists. I will introduce the both ones now. Okay, they are specialists on adaptation and climate change agenda. As I mentioned, it's an informal dialogue, and I'd like to say that I'm very honored to introduce two good friends. Alice Hill, she's from Council on Foreign Relations, United States. She is the David Rubinstein Senior Fellow for Energy and the Environment. Her work as CFR focuses on risks, consequences, and response associated with climate change. Alice previously served as a special assistant to President Barack Obama and senior director for resilience policy on the National Security Council staff, where she led the development of national policy to build resilience to catastrophic risks, including climate change and biological threats. Her co-authored book, Building Resilient Tomorrow, was published last year in 2019. In 2020, Yale University awarded her the Public Voice Fellowship on the Climate Change. Congrats, be welcome. Cadu, Carlos Eduardo Frickman Young, but everybody knows him as Cadu. So he's a full professor at the Institute of Economics of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ, where he coordinates the Environmental Economics and Sustainable Development Group. He is also a collaborating professor of the graduate programs in environmental science at the State of Mato Grosso, University of the State of Mato Grosso in Amazonia, and also an environmental science and sustainability in Amazon at the Federal University of the State of Amazonas. A researcher at the National Institute of Science and Technology in Public Policy, Strategy and Development, and member of the Technical Scientific Council of the Brazilian Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service, PBS. And finally, this is the scientific panel for the Amazon. So they are good friends. I'm very happy that I can host you in this dialogue today. And so the dynamic is this. I will invite Alice to have the floor around 15 minutes, 20 minutes. After her, you have Cadu. And after, I will be back after both ones and manage the Q&A and wrap up the debate, okay? So Alice, be welcome. Cadu, be welcome. I'm really happy that you can join us today. And please, let's chat about adaptation, talk about the opportunities that you can discuss better this agenda and how we can move on. Thank you very much for joining us. So you have the floor, and after you, Cadu, you go after her, okay? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Izabella, for having me here today. It's really my honor and pleasure to have a chance to share with you. I must say, I agree, we need to find the hope, and I am very confident that humans will be able to adapt to climate change. We are a resilient species. Of course, the question is how much pain we will go through as we adapt. You know, when it comes to climate change, the story is no longer that it's a threat in our distant future. Climate impacts have moved firmly into the present, and the real story is that the rate of change is accelerating. We are changing ever more quickly, and therefore we are experiencing typically more damaging impacts. So even as we struggle to deal with the pandemic right now, climate change has continued to occur and will continue to occur for the foreseeable future. One of the important things for all of us to remember is that even if we were successful in cutting our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions to zero tomorrow, we would still need to deal with accelerating impacts for at least the next several decades. So we are in for more trouble for quite a while, and adaptation efforts really haven't begun at any scale to match the type of threat that we will see and we are already beginning to see. You know, every day it seems that the news is full of some kind of new record related to climate change. In June, the Russian Arctic reached 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 Fahrenheit. That's the highest temperature ever experienced in the Arctic since we started keeping records in 1885. The Arctic is warming at nearly 3 times the rate of the global average, and June's that single day high was part of an entire heat wave that occurred for a month in the Arctic. As a result of the lowest level of sea ice in the Arctic, we have seen at least 50 ships crossing the Arctic Ocean. The Russians are building up their northern sea route, so we will see much more activity in that area. This week in Baghdad, Iraq, a city known for heat, but not for its level of air conditioning, thermostats reached 51 C or 125 degrees Fahrenheit. At some point in the future, if we continue on our current trajectory of emissions, there will be places in the world that could be uninhabitable for humans. It would simply be too hot and humid for humans to be outside for more than several hours. And of course, if there's no air conditioning, that means that people can't live there. And if there's not power security, energy security, they won't be able to live there. In Baghdad, in the face of that kind of heat, people took to the streets because the government was unable to provide sustained power, and it became quite intolerable to try to deal with that level of heat. We've also seen this year, the Atlantic Ocean has experienced already 9 named storms, and we have many more months to go in the hurricane season. Our weather services in the United States have predicted a very active hurricane season in 2020. Similarly, in Asia, cyclones have pummeled India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines in 2020 so far. That these events have occurred in quick succession is not surprising. It's unquestioned, really, that the Earth is heating up. July was the hottest month on record ever for the planet. It was also the 43rd consecutive hottest month, hottest July ever experienced, and the 415th consecutive month with above average global temperatures. So the pace of climate change influenced extreme events is picking up, and their potential to cause significant destruction is increasing. We are all experiencing what climate change looks like and feels like, and that really wasn't true just maybe 5-10 years ago. It wasn't as frequent. It's faster now. These impacts are hard on everyone, but they're unquestionably hardest on the most vulnerable in our community, the poor, the older, the more elderly, the disabled, the children. And we really don't have plans yet that adequately address their needs in the face of extremes. When you come to nations, certain geographic areas will pay dearly for climate change, and they're typically areas that really haven't had a lot to do at all with creating the problem of climate change. They haven't contributed in any material way to the level of emissions. So for example, the small island developing nations face an existential threat from sea level rise, even though they've had minimal role in contributing to greenhouse gases. The billion people dependent on fish for protein may see that threatened as fish search for cooler temperatures. We're seeing an exodus of tuna from the tropics, and many of these nations are dependent on the tuna industry to support their economies. Similarly, droughts are already decimating small-scale farmers and their families in Africa on a routine basis, creating deep food insecurity there. All of this has serious implications for our global security. We are facing the threat of unprecedented migration. Climate change is typically viewed as a threat multiplier. It's going to make many things worse. And one thing that it's going to do is put more people on the move. They'll simply be displaced from their homes, either from an acute shock like a cyclone or a hurricane, or from a slow moving event like a drought. But in either case, they will eventually be driven from where they live because either they can't make a living or they've lost their homes due to the event. It's really a problem, as my scientists call it, of too much or too little water across the globe. And unfortunately, the too much water is going in places that don't want it, and too little water is going in places that need water. And then sometimes it mixes together in unfortunate ways because it's just too much all at once of either one. Last fall, the Global Commission on Adaptation, headed by Ban Ki-moon and Bill Gates, called for greater global action on climate adaptation. I think there's a general recognition that the time is now, that we have spent many years working on the mitigation of emissions, which continues to be the most important resilience strategy of all. But we need to get down to business on how we're going to prepare for these new extremes. Numerous barriers have stunted widespread understanding of climate risk and pathways for adaptation. I was at a meeting last week where I learned an interesting figure that the estimate is that in terms of financing offered for adaptation, it's only about 5% of the financing overall that's offered for green efforts, green bonds, etc. So 95% goes to mitigation and 5% goes to adaptation. But we have these impacts happening now where people are being killed. And of course, there's long-term economic devastation, often to very poor people who really don't have the means to jump back, be resilient, and get back to business. Another thing that I frequently encounter is that many of the policymakers and the decision makers, both at the subnational and national level, have had no training in the dynamics of climate change. Whatever they know about climate change, they've learned, this is certainly true in the United States, they've learned through whatever media they consume. And in the United States, our media is very divided as to how serious climate change is. And so that then you find that because they don't have formal education on climate change, they often discount what is the nature of the threat and how serious it is. And of course, the topic has become highly politicized in our country and in many other countries. And finally, deep uncertainty surrounds how much will we change? How will we change exactly? Where will it be? What will it look like? We don't have all the answers for that in any way, shape, or form. In fact, some of the answers that we're getting now are so basic that it's pretty astounding. There's a remarkable NGO in the United States, quite small, called Climate Central, and their focus is educating meteorologists on the risks from climate change, creating graphics that the TV weathermen can use, or weather people can use in their presentations of forecasts. But they also decided to do a separate study on sea level rise. They became concerned that some of the areas in the world, most notably Asia, South Asia, simply didn't have good evidence for how much they were going to suffer from sea level rise. In the United States, we have LIDAR. In Australia, there's LIDAR, which is a much more accurate way of measuring what the actual elevation of land is. In a large swaths of the globe, they don't have access to this. So Climate Central decided to take some LIDAR information as well as some other information that had been used in the past that was developed by our NASA, our National Space Agency, combine that to really look at what was happening in South Asia. And it was astonishing. They realized that it matters whether a building is 3 feet or a meter above sea level rise, or 3 meters or 10 feet above the sea. But projecting sea level rise requires not only estimating how much the seas are going to rise, but comparing it to existing land elevations. And we weren't doing a good job of that. Particularly in these areas. So the data had an average error rate of 2 meters. So that means that if you had a small building or something else, you could think that was actually the sea level, and you would make a gross miscalculation about how many people are at risk from sea level rise. And that's exactly what they found. They found that with using this new combination to get better quality data that the world had deeply underestimated the number of people at risk of being flooded annually. It jumped from an estimation of 79 million to 300 million people. That's just one study, broad study of one area of the world, but we have deep lack of knowledge on many factors, and that is a major push that we need to have better information put in a format that decision makers can use so they can understand their risks and determine how to move forward. The areas that Climate Central studied include a number of megacities. These cities are typically on the coast. They face the dual threat of sea level rise and greater storm surge, as well as probably extreme heat. And a recent study concluded that our storm surges, that's that wall of water that comes in with a major storm, are now 8 inches higher than in 1900. This means that flooding erodes more beaches, it destroys more infrastructure, it causes the loss of more homes, and it puts more people on the move because their livelihoods are gone and their houses are gone. These regions are going to need help with everything: financing, insurance, better building practices, how to use land more effectively, emergency management, you name it. They're going to need help in the face of these worsening events, but we really don't have systematic programs to do that. All we have pretty much is pilot programs going on around the world, and that's a hit or miss proposition for many of these communities. So the essential question going forward is, how can we better achieve a future that protects all of us, but pays special attention to those least able to protect themselves, either because of disability or economics? And how can we make sure that we will have greater international stability and avoid some of these very worst economic and social impacts? We can't stop the seas from rising, but we can help communities adapt and build resilience. As we've seen with the pandemic, if we don't get busy on building resilience, it leaves open a window for insurgents, for criminal elements to exploit the situation in ways that are very detrimental to global security, but also the security of those living in these areas. So during the pandemic, we've seen, for example, Boko Haram increase its criminal activities, withhold aid from various groups, and use the pandemic as an opportunity to expand their influence. Similarly, in Mexico, the cartels have either come in to enforce order, or we saw El Chapo's daughters packing boxes with his face from the Sinaloa cartel on the boxes, packed with hand sanitizers, masks, and other things, because the governments are unable to respond in a meaningful way. And of course, in 1970, when Cyclone Bola hit what was then East Pakistan, 500,000 people killed. That eventually led to the creation of civil war and contributed to a civil war and the creation of Bangladesh. So these events are serious, and they can be highly destabilizing to governments if they can't respond adequately. And in many instances, my concern is that they are not adequately prepared, and we don't really understand yet fully how all of these security risks will play out. But if there's good news, it is that the pandemic has caused a drop in our carbon emissions, and reportedly last count 17%, but even here caution is required. It would have to be a long-standing drop to have any measurable impact. Right now, it will be a negligible impact in slowing warming. And even more significantly, we are seeing that some countries, China and India, are actually responding by engaging in more greenhouse gas emissions as part of their recoveries. So we know that if we spent better during the pandemic, we might have better results for climate change. Unfortunately, the United States and its bailouts of several $1 trillion did not have any measures for climate. Europe has been a leader on this, 850 million from its bailouts to green efforts, but certainly we need to see more energy around this. This is our opportunity. The timing is now to actually have different outcomes as a result of pandemic for the climate going forward. In 2015, we all came together at Paris and reached the historic measure. It's now 5 years later. Many things have changed. One of the biggest things that have changed is President Obama has left office, and with him, President Trump has decided to leave the Paris Agreement, which will occur later this year. He has also systematically dismantled the work that President Obama did, dismantled over 100 environmental orders. I worked, as was mentioned, with President Obama in his administration for 8 years. I served on his climate team. I cannot tell you, or we cannot underestimate the damage that President Trump has done to the climate effort in the United States. Many of the measures that were created are either rescinded or they are in litigation in courts. And currently, President Trump has no climate change policy proposed. So going forward, presumably if he is reelected, the United States will continue on the course it's currently on with no policies developed or implemented regarding climate change. COVID-19 has shown us what catastrophic risk looks like. It's given all of us a chance to experience what it means to have catastrophic risk enter our lives. It's affected food supplies, it's affected healthcare, it's affected the education of children. It's shown us how interconnected our lives are and how risk can seep from one area to any place in the world. It can send entire shockwaves through the global economy. The pandemic has also stressed our ability to learn and adapt in the face of deep uncertainty, the uncertainty of what this pandemic, how it's really spread and how we can stop it. But both of these risks, pandemic and climate change, are known risks. For both of them, it's always been a question of when, not if. And now the question for us going forward is, how can we use our experience with COVID-19 to have a better outcome with climate change? We have a real opportunity here, and this is our chance. It's very important that we act now, and this moment is one that we must take advantage of. So I'm delighted to have a chance to join with you today to learn more about what Brazil is doing and share what we are doing in the United States, as well as learn from the world's approach to what are truly global risks. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Alice. Please, Cadu.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Alice. Thank you very much for an excellent talk. And Izabella, thank you for being a leader. You're still a leader on these issues. One of the consequences of the current crisis that Izabella has referred to is the lack of leadership from the federal government into our federative country, which is very similar to the United States. And in the absence of national leaders, we need that the civil society and subnational governments to take the lead on the thing. And excellent idea that Izabella is leading these debates. Adaptation and climate change are in our country, and not only for Brazil, I think the region, Latin American region, is essentially a problem of justice because climate change is not neutral in social and economic terms. Climate change is unequal, first of all, in terms of mitigation and adaptation. Alice has already referred to the imbalance of funding for mitigation, 95%, while only 5% goes to adaptation. But most of the adaptation investment has to go to the developing countries, which are the ones who have the least contribution to the problem. So it is already unfair in its essence. But if you take the problem into a country which has been characterized by deep inequality, the situation gets much worse. And just give you some ideas and of problems that we're facing. On the rural side, we have just finished the study, we're looking for publication now, showing that in the Brazilian Northeast, which is the poorest region in the country, droughts are becoming more frequent. And as Alice has already said, right, the rate of change is accelerating, and the recent years we have experienced severe droughts. And the consequence of this has been that the most impact has been on family and subsistence agricultural producers, which are the ones who produce products such as corn and beans, which are much more sensitive to the lack of rain, while the commercial production which is receiving funding for expansion at the cost of deforestation of native biomes, especially the Cerrado. People think in Brazil only in terms of the Amazon, but they have different biomes, and Cerrado is possibly the one with the worst deforestation problem in the long run, in the last decade at least. And the situation is that this agricultural, this subsistence agriculture is being very affected, while funding goes to commercial agriculture, which uses irrigation, when of course has much more capacity of adaptation. One of the questions of the public has sent us is about that. Wow, why that poor social groups are most vulnerable to climate change? It's exactly because they don't have the resources, the funding that is necessary to get resilience against climate change. And the same thing we can say in the urban area, where the most affected people are mostly poor, living in peripheral areas of the metropolitan regions, but also in cities, not that large cities. This population has much less resources, therefore they adapt, they live wherever they can afford, and these are the areas that are mostly affected by the other side of the extreme events, which are the rain, severe rain episodes, and including floods, but also landslides, which are terrible in our country. People still dying from this year. COVID-19 has such a powerful effect that made us forget about previous problems. But January and February this year, we had severe problems on the southeast region of Brazil, which is the most populated one, because of extreme rain events. In Brazil, we have a very rainy season in summertime, which is between December and February, early March. And then we have the drought usually in the wintertime, which is now. And in our summer, we have these strong rains. There became actually this famous song by Jobim, which is the waters of March. It's exactly the rain, the violence of the rains of the rainy season of the summer. And we had lots of problems in many cities, and most of all, people affected were the poor. And this is also a problem for subnational governments. This inequality of climate change is also a governmental problem, because climate change is usually negotiated by federal national governments, while those who deal with adaptation are subnational, especially municipal, local governments, which are the ones who are the most away from the debate, and are the ones who have to take care of the people who are suffering from the landslide, from the extreme rain, of the flood. And they have to house people who lost their homes. They have to give food for these people. They don't have income. They have to feed them, to get clothes to them. And on the other hand, if there is a drought event, we have also the same problem. We need to accommodate on this one. So climate change is also unequal in political terms. And therefore, that is why we need so much coordination of public policies in order to improve governance. And in a situation where the federal governments are deniers of the problem, or basically they are governments that do not take this issue seriously, unfortunately both the case for the United States and Brazil. The situation is much worse because sometimes you have a mayor or a governor who has a better understanding of the problem, it's more dynamic and has action, but it's not the majority. And then we have this heterogeneity of situations between areas where the situation has been properly dealt with through public policy, but in most of the cases we have a chaotic scenario. Moreover, when we think about urban areas, we think about infrastructure, as both Izabella and Alice already referred to. We have problems concerning housing, urban mobility, and infrastructure. If there is a rise in the sea level, and it happens that there is an extreme rain event at the same time as we are having a high tide. Rio is at the sea level. It's the same problem as most of the countries, of the cities in this country are located near the ocean. We have a problem that we have floods, which affect mostly those who live far away because it's cheaper to live outside the city, in the outskirts where most of the poor population concentrates. So these people are suffering much more from adaptation. So all of this is to say that it's not possible to imagine any kind of social inclusion policy without a strong climate policy, especially involving adaptation issues for developing countries and obviously in my country. And also, it's not only necessary to have climate within the social policy, it is important to have it within the economic proposals, in a way that if there is a possibility of doing something, for example, adaptation in the urban environment, where we can improve the situation of the poor, because in the rich urban areas, people have enough resources to adapt by themselves. But in the poor areas, we need governmental intervention, we need public funding. In these areas, we need to have a kind of new development of the city, which is, in practical terms, the other side of what the people are not talking about, green economic recovery, Green New Deal, or green economy, low carbon economy, circular economy. We need investment to improve housing, infrastructure, mobility. And this is essential to have people working on this problem, which is a kind of employment generation aspect, which is essential to solve the problem. Another question that was made was how to conciliate climate policy with employment. I would say it's just the opposite. It's impossible to keep the current model in Brazil without a huge unemployment crisis, because the economic model that has been set up in the last decades, and it has been exacerbated, has been strengthened to a high limit within the current government, is based on the idea that the agricultural sector and the mining sector will be the ones that are going to lead the economy. But these sectors are characterized for not having job creation. It's just the opposite. There is no sector that has unemployed more people than the agricultural sector in Brazil. In the last 2 decades, they lost about 3.6 million jobs, because this kind of predatory agriculture that is being practiced in Brazil is mechanized, is intensive in agrochemicals, which are going to cause huge health problems, especially for the agricultural laborers that are using these products. And it is based to have cattle ranching in an extensive way that destroys the forest, to have very little value added and no job at all. So it's impossible to imagine that within the present model, we're going to have job creation. It's essential to change. And a Green New Deal, a green economic recovery, would be based on reshaping infrastructure, reshaping the urban area, and getting resources from nature nature-based solutions that are adapted to our realities in a way that will be much more socially inclusive than the current model. So we're not talking about here a utopic idea. We are talking about real world macroeconomics, because we need to have a kind of labor intensive activity to push the economy forward. And it has to be something that has the capacity to incorporate local knowledge as well. And it can be regionally adapted. So take as the Amazon as an example, where all of these resources are available. And just give you an example, energy in a remote settlement. We're going to have people using diesel generators, consuming very expensive fossil fuel to have electricity, while they have so many different possibilities using local biomass, wind power, solar, photovoltaic solutions, and actually the non-predatory ways to use the stream to have hydropower and things like that. So all of these possibilities open up a new way of leading the economy, okay? And it has to do with governments as well. We need to get away from a very unscientific vision of economics. Something that has been said before is that we need to bring science closer to solutions. And we need to bring social sciences closer to the solution. At the moment, my specific area, which is economics, has been very unscientific, based on prejudice, on the idea that the less government, the less state, the better, because the private sector is going to take charge of it. It's not true. We need a strong and capable government to prepare and to organize things so the private sector feels encouraged to invest. And that's a problem, that we have this destruction of institutional capabilities, leading to this problem of lack of coordination that at the ends up with no governance. And this absence of governance, in our case, is so strong that we are probably one of the few countries, probably the only large country, where emissions from CO2 have worsened, not improved during COVID, because the destruction of the environmental protection agencies, and I think that Izabella knows much more than I do about this issue. It's her life. How the destruction of these capabilities have resulted in the worsening of deforestation, especially in what we call this clash for property rights, deforestation for as a way to get a kind of ownership of the land that will end up being a kind of commodity to be commercialized. And also, this process is not something that results in the improvement of the quality of life. If you're going to say that, well, is this a problem that, okay, you're going to lose some environmental issues, the water will be polluted, or you're going to have less forests, you're going to lose biodiversity, or the weather will be worse and the temperature is going to rise. But people are profiting from this. Welfare is coming of this. But no, it's just the opposite. For example, in terms of deforestation, as already said, brings more risks for new pandemics. And just got some news from hantavirus now being discovered in bats in Mato Grosso, which is something that gets us very scared, because hantaviruses are extremely dangerous to human people. But also we have the problem of violence in itself. And we have studies showing that the more deforestation, the more violence, the more homicides, because this quest for land rights is extremely violent and decided by, as in the old Far West movies, by who gets the most, the power in the hands, I mean, the gun. So what we need is a new climate governance. And we need, it's very good to know that we have now in the Brazilian Congress a climate emergency law proposal at the federal level. It's very important that it has support from not only from the Brazilian institutions, but from other countries, especially congressmen from other countries to support this. But we also need to bring this climate emergency thing into the local subnational governments, state level and municipal level. Alice said that climate change is a threat multiplier, but it is also a multiplier of possible solutions in the sense that it can open up a new agenda that is definitively necessary. And just to finish my talk for the moment, a final issue has already been referred to by Izabella. We need new indicators. We need new ways to measure economic activity, to measure social welfare, and to measure environmental quality. It is extremely important that we rethink the way we can consider things. Just to give you an example, because COVID had so much impact, negative impact on economic activity, it is very likely that almost everywhere in the world, GDP growth rates are going to increase now, just by inertia, just for returning to the average situation, which are going to give the false idea that returning to the previous situation, the current, what they call the old normal situation, is something positive because it's going to increase economic activity, which is not true at all. It's just a pure statistical effect that after something gets into a very low level, whenever recovery gets the impression of very high growth rates. So this is something else that we need to incorporate in the agenda, but not only thinking into the national aggregate level, but also looking into the local, state, and municipal level. Okay, I stop for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Cadu. I think that you have really two important and amazing presentations with some common issues and also new ways to approach common challenges. I like too much the idea to highlight how we have this unbalanced political and economic situation between mitigation and adaptation agenda. And then how adaptation is so close to us as citizens. And it's part of our life, indeed, because we'll be completely exposed, and as Cadu highlighted, considering the subnational levels, the local levels, and how also Alice highlighted us, remembered us, how media in the United States and also subnational players, they don't know a lot about climate change, or they are part of some political strategy to go against climate change because you have this negationism approach, not only in the United States, but also in Brazil and other countries around the world. I think that I like to add when Alice brings to us the perspective of migration. This is something absolutely strategic at the global level. Even in Amazonia, you have around more than 3 million people that came from Venezuela to Colombia. And the scenarios also in Brazil, they're really, really important to understand these dynamics. In Latin America, you go around the world and probably you'll be more aggressive and more serious that you have today. And how indeed, when you discuss a national strategy to tackle climate change or international agreements to tackle climate change, to raise ambition, we not necessarily are clear enough to bring people together, consider the whole package of challenges that we need to face. My feeling is that I think that I agree with Alice when she mentions that we need to use our experience and motivated by COVID crisis to have a better outcome on climate change. It's not only to bring a green recovery umbrella, but understand how we can bring people to join us, consider these priorities, and as Cadu mentioned, how we indeed can explain better the new governance climate change system that we need, not on the national levels, but also at the global level. This is a really a strategic challenge, because when you're discussing about, we discuss about Paris implementation, and let's remember, and Alice mentioned this, that a lot of things changed since 2015 to present days. the geopolitical conditions that you had in 2015 to achieve Paris Agreement, they don't exist anymore today. Okay, this is a good example to illustrate how fast we have the change at the geopolitical level, but also consider the national requirements to not only to tackle climate change, but to have national strategies to implement Paris Agreement. And this means that you need to bring another adults into the room, if I can use this expression, because it's not based only on the environmental constituents or political constituents as it used to manage the negotiation process. We need to bring other players, and Kadu and also Alice highlight this because we need to understand the vulnerabilities, the risks. We need to understand how social agenda, inequality, and justice indeed will be impacted, and indeed how we can convince people to allocate better, not only public funds, but private funds to manage solutions, consider adaptation, and also mitigation. Alice remembered us that with climate change, what looks like and what feels like. This is COVID, it's a good example because we used to say that we have a crisis in the future, and now we are facing a global crisis that stopped the world and it blocked the future. Of course, this is a short-term perspective, but we need to learn with this process, and we need to understand how we can use better these agendas, and how we can also have these new economies, like the green ones, they will bring solution or not bring solution. Resource efficiency is a good example, like circular economy. We know that around 90% of the biodiversity loss and the water stress in the world, this is caused because of unsustainable resource use around the world. Climate change is around 56% of the global emissions. They're based on inefficient natural resource use. So circular economy has a really important role, and also other green economies, low carbon economies, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. And as Kadu mentioned, we need to do this also to have new job generation, because the economy that is there is not efficient to have job generation, and we are changing. And you are changing, you have innovation, you have green technologies, we need to solve problems, concrete problems. That means bring people in a fair way to live better with innovative lifestyles, and also to address better in developing economies, as Kadu illustrate, infrastructure, housing, and urban mobility, for example. So my feeling is that I like to mark, Kadu, when you mentioned that climate change also promote or brings unequal politics and also public policies. This is something that we need to understand how we manage and how we host inequalities and economic informalities in the future. We need to understand, and COVID showed to us that we have a huge problem, really huge challenges to manage better in short-term perspective solutions, but also how we can allocate better public funds consider the future. And Alice showed to us that you have these challenges today, also in the United States, consider policymakers and subnational players, that they don't have enough training to understand better climate change. And this is a big, big challenge for us, because something that really close the United States and Brazil, considering how we can bring policy players, and our scientists are another one that we need to convince to be together, to go into this agenda and to manage better decisions that will be taken today, but also consider the short-term and mid-term perspectives. My feeling is that to have really good inputs here, and I'd like to thank you, Alice, because you highlight how the financing on adaptation is around 5%, and everybody has to focus on mitigation, and even if you stop the emissions today, you have the consequence, and you have to manage adaptation. And this is something that how we can make clear from scientific acknowledgement, how we can indeed manage this agenda, how indeed we can convince people that's not based on fear, but based on our current experience, how we can improve our performance considering Paris Agreement implementation, and how at the national level you can have solutions with good co-benefits at the global level. We have different questions here, okay, but I don't know if we have enough time. Oh, you have 7, so you have around 15 minutes to end this webinar. I'd like to provoke you with 2 different movements. The first one, I don't know, is Kadu. If you'd like to add something for Alice, and Alice, if you'd like to add something for Kadu, please present your questions, and I will add 2 questions after you, such a way that you can answer the both ones in the last 10 minutes. Do you agree? You have 5 minutes. We have 2 minutes to present the questions. You can do. I know that's a hard task for you, and also for me. And Alice also have 1 minute or 2 minutes. And after this, I will read 2 questions. You have select 2 questions here, and you have 10 minutes, 5 minutes for each one to answer the questions. Yours, and also there were another one from the audience. Do you agree? This is something how we can survive in climate change Q&A. If you agree, if you agree with me. Okay, Kadu, ask Alice 1 question.
My question for Alice is relatively obvious. I mean, there is an election in November that it is extremely important for not only the United States, but for the entire world. So my question is, what are your expectations if there is a change in government? Because I mean, considering if there is the continuity of the existing government, we already know what to expect, but what would we expect if there is a change in government in the United States in the election?
May I add 1 question, 2 questions, because they're full related from Q&A. Alice, do you think that climate change will be an issue in the coming United States presidential election, or both Biden and Trump campaigns would avoid it? 1 question. And another one, I think that is very interesting. Let me check. I lost the question, but it's just to know that if Biden will be elected, do you think that what would be the proposals for the United States government to move forward to consider the climate change agenda, or do you have to take much time to manage the damage that Trump provoked, considering Obama legacy, and probably will take new measures to be slower than the world needs, because United States and China together, they are responsible for around 45% of the global carbon emissions. So I try to pick 2 other questions to facilitate what Kadu also asked to you. And you have a question for Kadu, and I'll try to add some questions from the audience also. Thank you.
So should I pose my questions now or answer?
Yes.
Oh, well, my questions are, I agree with the governance issues. So if you had the chance with strong federal governance on this issue in Brazil, what would be the first thing that you would do? What is the biggest priority measure for adaptation? And the second is certainly in the United States, we're seeing that the young people are driving a lot of the conversation about climate change. How can we make sure that we are capturing their voices and using their momentum to achieve what we want? And if that's happening in Brazil. So should I answer my questions now?
No, just a minute. I will add the question to Kadu and after back to you, okay? Kadu, how can the subnational government influence the policy of the Brazilian federal government in the scope of global climate governance? So I'll be back to Alice. Alice, you answer your questions, and after you have Kadu that will answer the questions, okay? So confused, but try to relax.
All right.
I try to manage the time, sorry. Please.
Well, thank you. And I think these questions go to the heart of what we are facing, and given the United States' prior leadership in climate, the world is to some extent facing. This election means a lot, and I think for probably it means the most when it comes to this issue, because we have a 2-party system. The Republicans have no policy for climate change. It's somewhere between the president saying it's a hoax, it's not happening, to some very mild discussions or mentions of climate change, but they have no policies for it. So if President Trump is reelected, I think that we will continue to see the same. I fear it will greatly damage the stature of the United States and could really send the wrong message to the rest of the world as they're trying to gather up ambition to do more about climate change. So if we get President Trump again, there's real trouble ahead in terms of addressing climate change. If Vice President Biden does become the president, he has already put out a very serious plan calling for $2 trillion worth of investments. We should be carbon neutral by 2050, I believe, and there are interim steps in between. And then there is deep focus on making sure that whatever climate policy we engage in looks at equity issues. And so 40% of the 2 trillion would be invested in disadvantaged communities, those who have face an environmental justice challenge, and making sure that we are addressing infrastructure issues for them, rebuilding in ways that are sound. There's money for housing, for retrofitting of housing, a very ambitious project. And I think it's getting to a challenge we have in all of our investments when it comes to adaptation. That our tendency is to want to protect that which has the highest monetary value. But if we choose to protect the things that have the highest monetary value, that ends up typically excluding those who live in poor communities. And we've had an interesting experiment in 2 different cities in the United States. Both cities suffered terribly from hurricanes. In New York City, we had Hurricane Sandy. In their rebuilding efforts, they have tended to want to put the money to rebuild Lower Manhattan, where we have Wall Street, our financial center. But that plan has come under criticism because it's left some disadvantaged, poor communities without much help. In Houston, which had Hurricane Harvey, which dumped a 1.5 meters of rain on Houston in a very short amount of time, there was no place for all that water to go, so it flooded. Houston passed a bond measure, and they decided instead to apply that bond measure basically to the places that flooded the most. And if you looked at the places that flooded the most, those were the places that hadn't been protected, and they were tended to be poor communities. Now, there have been reports that if the city if some of the voters had really understood what they were voting for, they might not have decided to do that. But I think in Vice President Biden's plan, you see reflected the concern that we've got to get more social justice issues addressed through climate than we've ever seen before. So in the coming months, I think that President Trump probably won't be talking much about climate change, but I do think that Vice President Biden will be talking a lot about climate change. The polling shows that this is a very important issue for many voters going forward. So that is one advantage that Democrats have, in that they do have a platform for a plan for climate change. And neither the Republican Party nor President Trump have any definable plan going forward. So it's hard to have a bipartisan discussion about climate change in the United States, because one party is just absent on the issue and the other party is putting forward proposals. Very interesting time, very important election for anyone who's concerned about the climate.
Thank you, Alice. Cadu, please.
Well, my answer to Alice is about the priority, what to do. Thank you, because you already answered your own question. I mean, in an ideal world, would have at the federal government to change with a similar view of putting in the investment, putting resources where they are mostly required, not where they have more political power, which tends to be the situation now, or in activities that provide the biggest returns in the Congress. But being more realistic, we don't have a problem only at the executive power, we have a serious problem with the Congress. Izabella, as minister, knows pretty well what is the Brazilian Congress, typical Brazilian congressmen and women. And this is quite difficult. But if there's something that we can do now, it's possible to do at the present moment at the Congress level. There is a debate on a reform on the fiscal policy. And the first thing I would do for the moment would be a change within the fiscal system to incorporate environmental and climate issues from both sides. On the spending side, in a similar way, as you said, to have priorities being established according to social and correct economic analysis, instead of a kind of exchange coin that you give to the political supporter of your region. So we need to improve investment. One of the biggest problems Brazil has faced is the underfunding for environmental and climate activities, and to increase that, but not only on purely environmental things, social issues as well. It is impossible to have a protected environment without the well-cared social side of the story, because poverty has many problems for the environmental thing. On the other side, I think in terms of tax collection, to implement some kind of polluter pays instruments that can provide correct economic signals. We at the moment have just the opposite thing. The more you exploit the environment, the worse you do to the environment, the more subsidy you get. So we need to revert this equation. And how to get subnational governments on that? Many things that can be done. Brazil has a very interesting policy, by the way. If I have something to tell the Americans on something good that we did, it's a policy called ecological ICMS. ICMS is a Brazilian VAT. It's a value-added tax, but it's a system where states provide money to the municipalities according to criteria that their state legislation established. Brazil is very similar in that sense with the United States, lots of autonomy. And this law is in the states, not all of the states have this law, but half of the states have this law. The better is the environmental performance, the more money the municipality gets. So it's a kind of performance-based system that has worked for a long time. And there's many studies showing that it increases and improves environmental management if there is a kind of economic return for the municipality. But there are other issues that can be improved as well. I will not go into a theoretical discussion about modern money theory, which is one of the issues that's being used now in the current Green New Deal debate. But it's basically to recover the capacity of the state to induce job creation. Not necessarily they have to contract the person, but they can induce the private sector to have this job creation thing. And this is very important. That's how how can include Brazilian young population, which have very low level of formal education. Quality of education is poor in our country, but providing green jobs, skills for green jobs as a way to incorporate these young people into thinking in terms of climate, environment, society, and economy as something that is linked, not something that is dealt actually separately or in opposition as most of the people do. And finally, in the very specific issue of municipal governance, according to the election we have now, is to ask and to pressure local mayors and councillors about what is your climate policy? What is your policy for a disaster? Disasters have a strong effect on the Brazilian economy. We estimated that it has at least a 2% GDP cost every year. only considering these extreme rain events, not considering droughts. So what is your policy on that? How to avoid on that? And as Izabella always said, we need indicators, how to improve the measurement of these impacts. How are you going to do with the problem of next summer arriving? We're going to have strong rain again, and the situation now is becoming independent if there is El Nino or not. Usually strong rain is associated here with El Nino. But what's happening is that we're going to have some events that were not expected, extremely violent and extremely costly for the public administration. What's your policy on that? What are you going to do? Especially if COVID has not been solved yet, if there is no vaccine for everybody and they're going to have this problem combined with the pandemic and extreme weather event. And what is your way to consider these inequalities in your policy plan? What do you have to say about your community, your city, and what we are expecting, and not only expecting, but we are measuring year by year all the data that Alice has provided us, only confirming what we already said. If there is a criticism to IPCC, is that IPCC is too conservative. And the situation is usually worse than the conventional scenario because they have to be conservative in the way they present it. So we need to cluster the idea that has to do with society as a whole. And as a whole, we are not people, someone that has an economic side, which is independent from our social life, which is independent from the environment we live. All of these things are together. And the big issue is how to improve our situation in social and environmental terms can become the engine to recover growth again, which is something that we desperately need. And just to give you a number, Alice, Brazilian per capita GDP now is less than it was 10 years ago. That's what we are talking about in terms of economic crisis.
Oh, thank you very much, Cadu and Alice. Unfortunately, I don't have time to manage other questions. You have more questions here. If you agree, I can send to you in the mail in such a way that you can see the kind of questions and also interests. They are really important, some of those. For example, we have here one of these absolutely fascinating concerning politics, climate politics, because you mentioned nature-based solutions. Cadu, and these concepts, you know, that come from IUCN, and this is something that the Convention on Biodiversity that the United States are not a part of. They're looking forward to address this next COP that will be this year, be next year, in such a way to assume nature-based solutions as a common issue for all the state members of the convention, but not necessarily this is will host, as we understand that must be hosted, consider climate change. And let's see, it's so provocative that you can assume that biofuels, ethanol is an example of nature-based solution. Oh, for Brazil is absolutely true. And you know how to manage this. Also for United States, you know the impacts of biofuels. But for some other countries of European countries, you know that they have some barriers, consider biofuels. So how we can manage biofuels can be considered, could be considered an NBS solution, but would be internationally accepted as such. This is a clear example. It's a really good question from Adriana Bueno that illustrates the challenge that you have in the climate politics world, because you have some affirmative agenda, you have some affirmative actions, but sometimes very difficult to manage this, consider the climate diplomacy and how diplomacy used to be so slow to face the challenge that the society, when assumed the responsibility, wants to move faster than the world used to move, consider climate change. So my feeling is that we cannot forget that Brazil has a national plan on adaptation. When we arrived in Paris in 2015, you have the Brazilian NDC, the more ambitious NDC in the world, but it's economy-wide. It's very important, exactly because you can illustrate the alternative, the possibilities that you can manage at the macroeconomic policies, and how you can use this to address solutions, combining development challenges and climate change agenda. And you have a national plan on adaptation. Unfortunately, after 5 years, you don't have a strategy, or different strategies to manage or even to implement our NDC. You have the rise of deforestation, so it's something that doesn't make sense. As to highlight Brazil, you have the rise of carbon emissions in Brazil based on illegalities, because deforestation is an environmental crime. So it is not, unfortunately, doesn't add value in the formal economy in Brazil. So it doesn't make sense that Brazil raises carbon emissions based on no official or no legal economic activities. And we need to manage this agenda based on mitigation and adaptation, considering the challenges on climate change global agenda. So Brazil has opportunities. I do believe in this. We need to understand better how, after 5 years, how, and also after the international agreement rules, how we can have innovative governance, climate change governance. And as Alice also highlight us, saying that with Mr. Biden election, we have social justice in an approach in a way that never have seen before. So it's something that's very important, how we can bring social issues together with economic issues as part of the solutions that we're looking for, consider climate change. Climate change is a concrete challenge. It's not something that you tell about the future. This is happening today, it's happening now. And we need to understand how we need to use this agenda to promote inclusive sustainable development, not only in Brazil, but around the world. As Alice mentioned, we have challenges in Asia, we have challenges in Africa, and also in European countries. We need to understand better the new dynamics around the world. Indeed, how this global issue, climate change today is, for me, an umbrella issue that brings a different agenda together and provoke us to move forward, not only to strengthen new international order, but also to strengthen our bilateral cooperation and how we can bring societies together. What I know, what I have been learning, is that the lack of leadership, we need to solve this problem, not necessarily based on the states or based on the government. We need to understand how the civil society, how society must move on with new roles. And this means not only scientists, not only science after COVID will emerge as a really key player considering global agenda, but we need to understand how other sectors, economic and social, and players, we indeed must be engaged to manage solutions, to manage this agenda. For me, to discuss governance, we need to move beyond the governments and also the old system that used to have considered climate negotiation. We'll change everything. Even for UNFCCC, my experience shows that we need to improve the United Nations performance, considering how we can conciliate different political and economic constituents like agriculture, energy, mining, infrastructure, the guys that will be into the room to cut emissions, and also subnational levels to face or to manage better adaptation agenda. This is something very new in Brazil and also United States. We have really good inputs and good expertise, but we need to bring these people together and need to improve our dialogue. I'd like to thank you very much, Alice, for joining us again, and also Cadu for being together with me, with us in CEBRI, with the audience. We have really amazing questions here. I will share to you if you agree, and saying that this is the first step. Okay, I think that it would be very amazing that we can share our visions, you can understand better our challenge, be closer. And I hope as I'm not a minister anymore, I can say that I hope that we can have the Democrats back in the United States, and I hope that we can have the Democrats back in Brazil, okay, and soon, and in such a way that we cannot lose time, and we are not the losers. I'm convinced that we're not the losers, okay? And we need to move forward and work hard to have a better life, to have a better understanding about our challenge, and to have a better relationship between humankind and nature. We can do this. more than we can do, I do believe that you must do it. So thank you very much. I don't know if Luciana, if Alice would like to have some closing remarks, and also Cadu, please, you have the floor. If not, I will have Luciana back to close the session. And thank you very much for the audience, and also my friends for joining us and to discuss. And I will propose that you can have other webinars discussing better adaptation agenda. If you agree, I promise that I will move these pieces on the chess board in such a way that you can bring these issues in the highlight approach and addressing better inequalities and economic informality. Thank you very much for joining us. And Cadu and Alice, close remarks if you want. And Luciana, you end the sessions. Okay, thank you, bye-bye, and enjoy. Don't forget to enjoy the life. Thank you.
Thank you, Izabella. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Carlos Eduardo. Thank you for the audience for staying with us until now. Thank you for all of you. Bye-bye.
I'd like to say thank you. And Izabella, we have to keep this talk as we discussed before. We need to keep this talk going on. Thank you very much.
I'm on board. Believe me. As Schwarzenegger, I will be back. Okay, so I'm on board. Alice, please.
Thank you. What a delightful discussion. So many important issues, and I look forward to being part of the conversation going forward. Lots to be done, lots of hope, and let's get going. It's time. Time is now.
Thank you very much. Okay, see you soon. I hope so. Okay, and Cadu, let's talk and prepare an agenda to dialogue with Alice in the future. And good luck in your elections. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.